أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بفضل الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. We're gathered obviously tonight commemoration and remembrance of Quds Day, which is the last Friday in Shahr Ramadan al-Mubarak. Generally this is conducted during the day, but we have been put in a position where we have this discussion at night rather than the day due to obviously the restrictions that are involved. And generally it's something where people gather to talk about the oppression that's taking place in the state of Palestine. Another thing, it also has coincided with the day of Nakba, the day of the catastrophe, on the day where the people of Palestine had their land usurped and their homes taken by the occupiers at that time. What we want to talk about today is that Allah Azza wa Jal created all mankind to be free. When we say free, to have freedom in choice, freedom of thought, and to be able to express their opinion. And in this, He's left you in the dunya, obviously, and said, La ikraha fi din, that there's no one compelled, so there's no compulsion when it comes to making someone follow your way, your thought, your religion. And He says, قَدْ تَبَيَّنَ الرُّشْدُ مِنَ الْغَيِّ, that guidance is clear from misguidance. It's apparent. There's no need for me to compel you. No one's compelled into heaven. No one's compelled into hell. We all make choices. We are free to choose to believe, and we are free not to choose. And obviously He sent His prophets to remind us of this, that we have this choice, but there is an obligation, and that we are indebted to God for our creation, our existence, and the subsistence that we receive. And like I mentioned, He has not coerced anyone in any way. So Allah Azza wa Jal has left you to be free to choose whether you wish to serve God, because if you don't serve God, you will serve others. As Imam Hussein alayhi salam on the day of Ashura said to his enemy, he said to them that you are free. He said to them, وَيْلَكُمْ يَا شِيعَةَ آلِ أَبِي سُفْيَانَ. He spoke to them, you are the followers of the family of Abu Sufyan, being the followers of Yazid. إِن لَمْ يَكُنْ لَكُمْ دِينٌ وَكُنْتُمْ لَا تَخَافُونَ الْمَعَادِ فَكُونُوا أَحْرَارًا فِي دُنْيَاكُمْ هَذِهِ. So if you don't have a religion and you do not fear the day of judgment, then be free in this world. Don't be someone else's slave. If you don't wish to be the servant of your Creator, who's entitled to be your master, and He's allowed you to have that choice, He said, then be free in this world. Be free, make free and conscious choices. Being a slave in general to other than God means to be a slave to any master whatsoever. And this is one of the biggest problems that has contributed to the oppression of the Palestinian people. Their oppression is so strong because the overlord that oppresses them has many slaves. And we're talking about slaves that attend his bidding at any call that he calls to them, or any command that he gives them. And these examples are best shown especially with the recent ICC court case with the war crimes committed against the Palestinians, where our government attended the proceedings there, even though they were not part. They went there voluntarily. And they even mentioned that they went there because they were strongly advised by the Zionist entity to attend. So they went there showing that they are subservient to this master. And this is the biggest problem that the Palestinians have. Their oppression exists because everyone is complicit with them being oppressed. And people do not take a stand and do not let their voice be heard when they see that something is wrong. Now, to the point that the Australian government at this mentioned that Palestine is not even a state. And this jargon that gets used all the time and is mentioned because the answer was Palestine is not a state. In order for you to charge the Zionist entity with war crimes, you have to just start charging with like take it under the court proceedings of being a crime in general rather than a war crime. That's just like saying, for example, that the Nazis, what they did to the European Jews in World War II, was not a war crime because there was no Jewish state in Europe. It's used, if you were to use that, you would probably be hung from the rafters and wouldn't be allowed to express your opinion. But in this circumstance, that they were free to mention this and with impunity, the Zionists act, and those that serve them do the same thing. And even when a war crime is committed, like the murder of Haj Qasim Soleimani and Haj Abu Mehdi al-Muhandis, at the beginning of the year, there was no one condemning this, and everyone was accepting of this crime that took place. But one thing we can learn from the Jewish people in general, and to remember, I always want to add that the Zionist entity does not represent any religion. It's a secular system, and it's godless in the way that they act. They do no way represent the Jewish people, just as ISIS does not represent the Muslims, and just as the Nazis do not represent any atheism or Christianity. All these people are power mongers and act on this in this manner. So just like the Jewish people always assert the Nazi persecution must never be forgotten, we have to do the same when it comes to remembering the oppression of the Palestinian people. And from beginning, we have to look at the past. It's not something that started 2 weeks ago, 2 months ago, 2 years ago. It's something that has been over 70 years and has to be remembered in this manner. We have a real tendency to forget things. If you look at, for example, Spiker, where ISIS murdered over 1,700 Iraqi soldiers, just took them into a camp and slaughtered them, or even the rule of Saddam, or even the crimes that were committed by the US Army in Abu Ghraib or in Bagram, or in general US foreign policy. We have a tendency to forget all this because, people are too interested in Centrelink. They make a bit of money from Centrelink and say, this government's really awesome, not realizing the crimes that the government commits in order to take a stance when it comes especially to lobbying or even making sure that the right people don't get the right people get into the right places in the political offices. Now, when we look at Muslims in general, Muslims have a tendency to worry about just the things that pertain to themselves. They have a tendency to think, all right, when it comes to prayers, I'll pray, I'll attend my Jum'ah prayers, or even now everyone's worried about attending the Eid prayers, wearing the right clothing, and they limit their Islam to just this. But you need to understand your religion is not limited to the masjid or the Islamic center. It's not limited just to these acts of worship. Your religion is supposed to be applied in all situations throughout life. You being a Muslim and your state of being a Muslim is applicable everywhere. And even to the point when the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions that a Muslim is someone whom the people are safe from their hands and from their tongue. That a Muslim isn't someone that just uses their hands for prayers and their tongue for prayers, but even their hands aren't used in order to aggress against others, or even their tongue in that manner. The people are safe from them, but the Muslim has to use this tongue also, and if they can, their hands, in order to prevent oppression. Now let's take a look at the state of the plight, of the Palestinians. Firstly, I can't be like the Muslims that blame Islam or Muslims for ISIS. I need to understand that the origin of ISIS and who supported ISIS from the very beginning. One of the videos I recommend people to watch is when the former Mossad director is being interviewed by Jazeera journalist Mehdi Hassan. When this former Mossad director is being interviewed, he actually mentions that during the war in Syria with ISIS, that Israel, that's obviously the term that he's using that we recognize as a Zionist entity, because we still do not recognize that state, just as they don't recognize Palestine to begin with. But he says Israel gave assistance to ISIS soldiers. They actually took them in. And he said, we did this for the humanitarian factor, that we're still human beings. So although we consider them our enemy, he said, we did this because they're humans. Now, when the correspondent asked him, would you do the same with Hezbollah? The former Mossad director said no. He said, we have a different account with Hezbollah. So he said to him, but I thought there was a humanitarian measure. If you look, you need to watch this video. It's important for you to witness this video. He said, what about this humanitarian lie that you just fabricated moments ago? You know, he doesn't use those words, but what about what you had said previously? It doesn't apply, because in reality, ISIS was supported and funded and created by the Zionists and their allies, and there's no hiding this fact, because we see by the way people act towards others. It's like when someone shows affection to somebody else and then tells them that they don't like them. You can see by someone's actions as how they feel towards you. But let's take a look at what the attitude of the Zionist entity initially was. Moshe Dayan, who was one of the directors of the occupation from the very beginning, has said a famous quote which we use every year. You'll hear this all the time. He says, we must tell the Palestinians that we have no solution. So there's no such thing as a two-state solution. They say that we have no solution. He said, you shall continue to live like dogs, and whoever wishes may leave. And they've stood by this. This is from the 1960s. No Zionist politician has ever stood up and said, we don't agree with what Moshe Dayan said. So Moshe Dayan said, you will live like dogs, and this is the attitude that they've adopted since. Now, the problem, as I mentioned earlier, with their existence and their support is not only from the actual occupiers and oppressors, but from those that give them support. In fact, I read an article several years ago. It was about a young man. His name was Yusuf Bashir. When you listen to this guy's story, I don't want to get too gruesome with the example, but imagine before I tell you the story, imagine someone is cutting someone's throat, and while he's actually cutting his throat, the person whose throat is being cut is thanking the killer. This is the story of this Yusuf Bashir. Someone you could look up the article of his story. This young Yusuf Bashir lives in Palestine, was living in Palestine. I don't know if he's still there. He said when he was 15 years old, the IDF occupied his house and they used it as a military post. Using the house as a military post, he said we were left to only a small segment of the house. For 4 years, we had to seek permission to use the bathroom or the kitchen for 4 years. He said, yet my father used to always say, be respectful and pleasant. Imagine this. Imagine having a father like that. Like, what do they call them? Invertebrate? Someone without a spine? Imagine having a father that is occupied and he's saying, don't resist. This is the biggest problem. The people that don't want to resist. The people that accept the occupation. And he said that I continued to see my father as wrong. He said because they were living in our home, we couldn't move around our home, and eventually he got shot. And he went to hospital, and he said while he was at hospital, the good treatment he received from the Zionist doctors and nurses made him accept what his father's stance was. But this is pretty much saying that I take you out right now. I go, imagine someone walks into your house, keeps you, in the modern world today, imagine one of those girls that gets kidnapped and is kept prisoner in a house for 4 years, and then the guy shoots her, and then after she returns to tell her story, they come and say, this guy was a good bloke that kept her under a house arrest for all this time. It's ludicrous to even begin with, but some people have this attitude towards occupation. They say, look, just accept it, and this is the way it is, and don't resist. And these are the people that have failed in life. These are the people that if the Nazis had entered their country, they would have been the ones that did not resist. That's how Hitler was able to take over Paris in 6 weeks. And the only people that did resist were a very small amount of people. But all these ones that did resist, all these ones that took stance, at first they were considered by the occupiers as what? As rebels, as terrorists, but eventually they were considered as patriots because they're the ones that stood tall. And eventually these are the people that become leaders. If you even look at the American resistance of the British occupation, those that resisted, people like Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and George Washington, were later not only considered patriots and then the founding fathers, but they were the ones to assume the presidency. They were involved in the write-up of the American Constitution, which exists today, because they were the ones that were initially terrorists and considered in this manner because they resisted occupation. Now, what is needed is cooperation by people. People need to work together. One person can't spread their voice. And the way to cooperate, to stop oppression, is, we'll be talking about this as we move along. But why is it so necessary for us to cooperate and work together? The commander of the faithful, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, says, التعاون على إقامة الحق ديانة وأمانة. That cooperation in order to uphold truth is diyana, it is religion. And then he says it is amana, it is a trust. So someone that doesn't uphold or work together to uphold truth, okay, is someone that has no religion and is someone that is not trustworthy, because they are not working in order to uphold the truth in this manner. Now, generally, the Quds, it's often politicized, and and it's made to be the core reason of this day, and we call it Yawm Al-Quds. But if we want to begin, obviously I don't want to bring up a debate on this. On the scale of holiness, it's not even on par with other holy sites. If you look at Makkah al-Mukarramah, Medina al-Munawwara, and other sites, they are far grander than this. Okay, and even to the point, if we look at the Kaaba in itself, which is a sanctity of God, we know that the blood of the believer is more sanctified. That you have to save the blood of someone. You can't just kill people. And outright murder, it takes place in Palestine on a daily basis. So the problem with over-sanctifying the Quds is also, the other big problem is you leave the Palestinian people to the mercy of the region's clerics, of whom many have a poor interpretation of the faith. So we can't do that. It's about looking at their rights to exist and live properly. So what we actually need to do is to look at the silent, and I mention the word silent, oppression of the Palestinians. Because even if the Palestinians are liberated, they will still be slaves of the ruling bodies there, being the rich and those that exist there. Just as you saw with the other countries in the Arab Spring, they got rid of their rulers, and what were they left with? They went from one tyrant or despot to another. So anyway, the whole idea of this day, to begin with, is a day where we stand against oppression in general. But we look at the root of the oppression. The beginning of all this oppression was the installation of a foreign government to overrule a certain people. And in order to force this upon them, whoever did not agree was expelled from the country and forced into refugee camps. So let's talk about those that assist the oppression first. The first hadith is on Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. He says, Al-Amilu bil-dhulm wal-mu'inu lah wal-radhi bih shuraka thalathatuhum. So first he says, the one that commits oppression. Wal-mu'inu lah, the one that helps the oppressor. Wal-radhi bih, and the one that is complicit. So in other words, I don't have to be an oppressor, nor do I have to be someone that helps an oppressor. It's sufficient if I accept the oppression. If I am one of these three, he says, Shuraka thalathatuhum. The Imam says they are all associates. Even in law, we have here that if a criminal commits an act, we have the accessory before the fact, after the fact. Anyone that assisted in any way wears some kind of part in the crime. But the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam says one step further. He says, إِذَا كَانَ يَوْمُ الْقِيَامَةِ نَادَ مُنَادٍ, that on the day of judgment a caller will call out, أَيْنَ الظَّلَمَ وَأَعْوَانُ الظَّلَمَ, where are the oppressors and the ones who help the oppressors? Then he mentions, who are these? He says, وَمَنْ لَاقَ لَهُمْ دَوَاتًا أَوْ رَبَتَ لَهُمْ كِيسًا أَوْ مَدَّهُمْ بِمَدَّةِ قَلَمٍ. So basically anyone that gave them paper to write on, anyone that even tied bags. You imagine something as simple as tying a bag for them, or anyone that even gave them ink to write with, he said, is of these. فَاحْشُرُوهُمْ مَعَهُمْ. He says, فَاحْشُرُوهُمْ, place them with them on the day of judgment. So they're all one. Now the question is, why are they all one? Well, look at it. Honestly, have you seen, every time you see the current American president barking on the microphone, how many of you look at him and think that he would be anyone's problem if they were, say what you're fighting one-on-one? How many people had difficulty in defeating him? No. So what makes him so strong? Their strength is with those that are around them, those that assist them, those that help them, those that fight for them, those that tie the bags for them. The simplest of things, all these that surround you are what give you this strength. And part of this month, in the month of Shahr Ramadan, we're supposed to look at those that are less fortunate than us. They are the oppressed. It's fitting to be in this month because these people are oppressed in this month and no one looks at what is happening to them. Firstly, there is a lot of oppression in the world. We mentioned first why Palestine. When we talk about Palestine, Palestine is the root of the problem. I'm going to tell you a story. Now this story is just a story of the parable, like the boy who cried wolf. Didn't necessarily take place, but it has a meaning. Once these people are living in a village, they're living happily, and a group of another tribe moves into the village. When they move into the village, this tribe that's current in the village is happy, will share the land that you may enter this land. But this new tribe, when they enter, one day they kill a dog of one of the villagers. So the villagers come up to the Sheikh of the Ashira, who's the head of the tribe, and they say, one of these new villagers killed our dog. So the chief says, go find the one that killed the dog and kill him. They said, that's a bit excessive. Why should we do something like that? And he said, I've given you what I advise you. It's up to you what you do. A week later, they come in and they said, this new tribe that moved in has been stealing our crops. What do we do? He said, go find the one that killed the dog and kill him. He said, why is he always talking about the dog? So they left. A time came later and they had killed a member of the tribe. So they came and said to the chief of the tribe, what do we do? They've killed a member of our tribe. He said, go find the killer of the dog and kill him. So they said, all right, we'll listen to him. So they went back, they found the killer of the dog and they killed him. When this tribe realized that they had killed a man for killing a dog, you know what they said? They said, oh my God, they killed a guy because he killed a dog, an animal. Imagine when they found out we've stolen their crops and we've killed one of their men. What are they going to do to the whole tribe? So they left. See, the root of the problem is a Zionist entity. This is the root of the problem. This is why it's the most important point. This is why our ulama specified this problem, because everything else branches and stems off from this. Another thing, the Palestinians' occupation is currently the longest military occupation in the world. Did you know that? Could you imagine that? In fact, if you look at Gaza in general, it's effectively what's it called? A jail. The amount of people in there, the way that they're cut off from even the border to Egypt. They're not allowed to receive anything. They are living in an open field or a city that is a prison. And in fact, they are the largest refugee problem in the world. Everywhere you go in the world where there are refugee camps for the Palestinians. And they live in this state. And people might think they've got chips on their shoulders. Of course they do. Imagine you were cast out from your home and you're forced to live. If you go into these Palestinian refugee camps and see the way that they live. And not even the majority of Muslim governments support them. Everyone leaves them out. Everyone sees them as a problem for someone else to deal with. Firstly, by supporting the oppressed Palestinian, we are doing this for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. We do everything because Allah Azza wa Jal wishes us to do this. And we are spreading Ahlul Bayt alayhum as-salam's teachings through our actions. And what teachings are we talking about? The wasiyya, the commandments of Amir al-Mu'mineen to his sons, Al-Hasan wal-Hussein, where he says, Kuna lil-zalimi khasma, walil-madhlumi awna. the Imam says to his sons, be an enemy towards who? The oppressor. He doesn't specify what kind of an oppressor. If he's an oppressor, oppose him and be an aid and a help to the oppressed. My dear brothers and sisters of all faiths, if the situation was reversed, imagine right now that the Palestinians had the people that are governing them right now, whether they are seculars or Jewish people, which generally we know they are secular. They're a godless entity that rules them. If they were to be oppressing them, we would stand with the Zionists right now that are being oppressed. We're not people that are standing with someone because we say they're Muslims and we're Muslims. In fact, the biggest supporters of all this movement, the Quds Day, was started by a Shia cleric, not even a Sunni cleric, and the majority of the Palestinians are Sunni. So the whole idea is it's oppression. The thing that we are upset about is oppression, the fact that oppression exists there. So how do I stand up with this? If you look at all movements, they begin with the weak. When I say the weak, the mustad'af, meaning the one without ability. The Muslims at the beginning, they stood with Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam wa qillah. They were small in number. And when they said mustad'afin, they were weak. They didn't have the support that they needed. Yet they resisted. They stood tall until La ilaha illallah was spread. The call of there is no God but Allah was spread all over the globe. Well, we have over 1.7 billion Muslims today because of this. The movement of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, Karbala, that was a movement that there was under 100 people involved in it that were killed, and altogether with those that were captive. Yani you're not talking even a significant number. And then the people go into Karbala today. They stand, and all the revolutions and movements that have come because of Karbala are in the millions, in numbers where people have stood with something that began small. In fact, all the revolutions you look at around the world, most of them are started by who? Students. They're the ones that begin these. Not military personnel. Students begin these. And the human voice is so important. Just to let your voice be heard, just to speak. When you're sitting with someone, mention what's going on. Make it alert. Make them alert that this is wrong. It doesn't matter who you're talking to. Let them know that there is this oppression and it exists. Write something. The pen, as they say, is mightier than the sword. And let them know that apartheid was recognized in South Africa, but it hasn't been recognized in Palestine. Another thing, if you look at the BDS, when they tell you to boycott products, look, I'm not with there's people that go on a crazy level with this. You can't just cut off everyone. Doesn't work, because all the companies, they deal with the government that governs the occupied state of Palestine. But we have to cut anyone, and I'll refer to it obviously because they deal with them as Israel, that those that deal with Israel and are openly in their dealings with them, and they're strong supporters, they're the ones you cut off. And anything that's made in Israel, you see something, for example, those SodaStream. SodaStream is made in Israel, by Israel. Things like the toolboxes, the Stanley toolboxes, they are made in Israel. Stuff like that. You've got to be careful with your dates. The dates that you buy. The dates. When you cut them off, this is the stance that you take. Why? Because this is oppression. And this is the Australian way. The Australians did this with the South Africans. When they saw these South Africans oppressing, they stopped. And as an Australian, you have to stand against oppression. These lackeys that stand in government now are subservient to this oppression. You can't be like that, being an Australian, to accept this form of being subservient and being the lackey. Another thing is supplicating for the oppressed. We're talking about people living in Australia. In every country, there are different ways for you to deal with. Doing dua for the oppressed, doing dua for Allah to hasten the reappearance of our Imam Sahib al-Amri wa Zaman. And also we should therefore use this day also to mention other countries that are oppressed. The other countries like Yemen, which is also a branch of this, Bahrain, and these countries in these bad states. Or right now, Syria and Iraq, who have also been under the threat. You know, if in Syria up till now still gets attacks, and they're a sovereign nation from the oppressive Zionist state. Now, another thing I need to mention is what is oppression. And we'll finish off with mentioning what is oppression, because we're saying that the Israeli state oppresses, the Zionist state oppresses. But what is oppression? Oppression, in a definition, is when you cross the boundary of what is right. See, if there was, and because we're not warring, we're not troublemakers as well as like we are portrayed by the media, the Muslims. If all the people from Palestine, these people that lived in Palestine that have been thrown into all these refugee camps, were brought back to Palestine and through referendum were able to vote on to who was to rule them. And if they said right now, imagine all the Palestinians were brought back, they all voted to be ruled by Benjamin Netanyahu and his ilk, we would now stamp down and say, all right, we'll accept the existence of this state. Why? Because they've spoken, they voted to have them as the rulers. Then we have no say anymore. But this will never happen, because we go back to what originally said. The thing that Moshe Dayan is the main thing, and even Noam Chomsky mentions this many times. He says that no one has ever mentioned anything against his line where he says that the Palestinians can live like dogs or they can leave. And inshallah, through these many years of people remembering this day, and especially with the flag that's been flown to let people remember that there is a state called Palestine, even if people try and forget it, even if they try to kill it off and not make it exist, it still exists, and that people are still calling. Eventually it's going to come out and it will exist, because oppression does not last for long, and every oppressive state comes to an end, be it the Soviet Union where they oppressed the people, be it Nazi Germany, or be it the Japanese Rising Sun Empire that was marching through South Asia. And so is this Zionist entity. They too will come to an end and a demise like all else. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to remove this oppression and to give a victory to all those that are oppressed, and with this to hasten the reappearance of our master Al-Hujjat ibn al-Hasan. And may Allah not make this month end for any of you with you even having a single speck of sin upon you that has not been forgiven. My dear brothers and sisters, do not let the nur of this month leave you. Start from the day of the Eid as new people that are honest when they speak, are trustworthy when they deal, and are people that stand by the oppressed and stand in the face of the oppressor and are not a slave to this. We finish with the word of Imam Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam, where he said, Wallahi la a'tikum biyadi i'ta' al-dhalil wa la aqirru iqrar al-abid, or wa la afirru firar al-abid, that I will not give you like my hand in acceptance or allegiance because out of humiliation, nor will I state the words of a slave, or nor will I flee like a slave. Walhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin.